What if I told you that walking into the wrong cafe at the wrong time could reveal the biggest secret of your life? A secret that would make you question everything you thought you knew about love, betrayal, and the woman you once called your wife. Stay with me, because this story will shake you to your core. Before we dive into this mind-blowing tale of hidden children and devastating truths, make sure you smash that like button if you believe secrets always come to light. Drop a comment telling me what you'd do in this situation. And don't forget to subscribe with notifications on because stories like this one will change how you see relationships forever. Trust me, you won't want to miss what happens next. My name is Daniel, and I'm about to tell you how a simple business trip turned my entire world upside down. 3 years ago, I thought I had it all figured out. At 34, I was the CEO of a tech company I'd built from nothing, worth roughly $15 million, with offices in 6 cities, and a reputation that opened doors from Silicon Valley to Wall Street. Success was my drug, and I was completely addicted. I lived in a penthouse overlooking the city, drove cars that cost more than most people's houses, and had assistants managing every detail of my life: board meetings, investor calls, acquisition deals. My calendar was booked months in advance, every minute optimized for maximum productivity. I told myself I was building an empire, creating something that would last, securing a future that would make all the sacrifices worthwhile. But success comes with a price, and mine was paid by the woman I'd married 7 years earlier, Rebecca. Rebecca was everything I thought I wanted in a wife when we met in college. Beautiful, intelligent, supportive, and most importantly, she believed in my vision when I was just another broke computer science student with big dreams and a small bank account. She worked 2 jobs to help put me through my final year while I coded in our tiny apartment, surviving on instant ramen and pure ambition. I remember those early days so clearly now. Rebecca coming home exhausted from her shift at the campus bookstore, finding me hunched over my laptop at 2 a.m. and still taking the time to massage my shoulders and listen to my latest breakthrough or frustration. She'd bring me coffee and remind me to eat, celebrating every small victory like it was a major triumph. When my first app sold for $2 million, Rebecca was the first person I called. When I started my company and worked 18-hour days for months, she brought me dinner without complaint. When investors tried to lowball me and I nearly gave up, she's the one who pushed me to fight for what I was worth. She was my anchor, my cheerleader, and my safe harbor. But somewhere along the way, as the money grew and the company expanded, I started seeing her as just another part of my success story, rather than the woman who'd made it all possible. I stopped noticing when she stayed up late, waiting for me to come home. I stopped seeing the disappointment in her eyes when I missed dinners, anniversaries, quiet moments that once meant everything to both of us. The divorce was finalized 2 years ago. Clean, amicable, or so I thought. Rebecca had asked for almost nothing. No alimony, no share of the business, just enough money to start fresh somewhere new. At the time, I'd been relieved. No messy court battles, no public drama, just a quiet end to what had become a quietly desperate marriage. Looking back now, I should have been suspicious of how easily she let me go. Rebecca had never been someone who gave up without a fight, yet she'd signed those papers with barely a word of protest. She'd packed up 7 years of our life together in a single weekend, taking only her personal belongings and leaving behind everything we'd built as a couple. She'd moved away immediately after signing the papers, somewhere up north, maybe Vermont or New Hampshire. I never asked for details. Why would I? I had a company to run, deals to close, success to maintain. Rebecca was my past, and I was focused entirely on my future. That's how I ended up in Millbrook Falls, New Hampshire, on a Tuesday morning in October, staring at a sight that would haunt me for the rest of my life. My flight from Boston to Seattle had been canceled due to a freak snowstorm. My rental car had gotten a flat tire on some backwoods highway, and the GPS on my phone had died just when I needed it most. I was lost, frustrated, and running late for a crucial investor meeting that could make or break our next quarter. Millbrook Falls looked like something out of a postcard, the kind of small town where everyone knows everyone, where maple trees lined Main Street in perfect fall colors, where time moved slower and life felt simpler. It was everything I'd once dreamed of escaping, and everything Rebecca had always loved about her childhood visits to her grandmother's house in rural Maine. The irony wasn't lost on me that I'd ended up in exactly the kind of place Rebecca used to beg me to visit with her. Just for a weekend, she'd say. Just to remember what quiet feels like. I'd always been too busy, too focused on the next big opportunity to waste time in small towns that offered nothing but charm and fresh air. The only place open at 8 a.m. was the Morning Bean, a small cafe with hand-painted signs and flower boxes. I needed coffee, Wi-Fi, and a quiet place to reschedule my entire day. That's when I saw her. Rebecca was behind the counter, her dark hair pulled back in a messy bun, wearing a simple green apron. She looked different, softer, more relaxed than I'd seen her in years, with laugh lines around her eyes and a glow that made her look younger and more beautiful than ever. But it wasn't Rebecca that made my heart stop. It was the toddler perched on the counter beside her. The little boy couldn't have been more than 18 months old, with dark curls, serious brown eyes, and a stubborn set to his jaw that I recognized immediately. He was wearing tiny jeans and a striped shirt, holding a sippy cup with intense concentration. He looked exactly like me. I stood frozen in the doorway, my briefcase suddenly feeling like it weighed 1,000 pounds. Rebecca hadn't seen me yet. She was focused on steaming milk for a latte, chatting with an elderly customer about some local festival. The little boy was watching everything with those serious eyes, occasionally babbling something that made Rebecca smile and respond as if she understood every word. 100 thoughts crashed through my mind at once. The timing was right. He looked about 18 months old, which meant he would have been born about 3 months after our divorce was finalized. But Rebecca and I hadn't been intimate in the final 6 months of our marriage. We'd been sleeping in separate bedrooms, barely speaking, except to handle the logistics of ending our life together. Unless... My mind raced back to the night before she moved out. I'd come home late from a business trip, emotionally drained from months of pretending our marriage wasn't falling apart. I'd found her in our bedroom, surrounded by boxes, tears streaming down her face as she wrapped our wedding photos in tissue paper. We'd ended up talking for hours about everything we'd lost, everything we'd failed to save, everything we'd once dreamed of building together. The conversation had turned emotional, then physical, one last, desperate attempt to find what we'd once had. I'd convinced myself it was just goodbye sex, a final closing of the book on our relationship. Rebecca had cried afterward, clinging to me like she was drowning, but I'd assumed it was just sadness about our marriage ending. I'd left early the next morning for another business trip, and by the time I returned, she was gone. Could that night have created this little boy? Could Rebecca have discovered she was pregnant after our divorce was already finalized? And if so, why hadn't she told me? Rebecca looked up then, and our eyes met across 20 feet of space and 2 years of silence. Her face went completely white. The little boy turned to follow her gaze, and when his eyes met mine, I felt something shift inside my chest. A recognition so deep and immediate that it bypassed rational thought entirely. Rebecca lifted the little boy off the counter, held him protectively against her chest, and backed toward what I assumed was a staff area, never taking her eyes off me. The message was clear. She was protecting him. From me. "Rebecca," I said, my voice coming out rougher than I'd intended. She flinched but didn't respond. "We need to talk," I continued. "No, we don't." "Is he mine?" The question escaped before I could stop it. Rebecca's face flushed red. "Lower your voice," she hissed, glancing around the cafe. "Is he mine?" I repeated, quieter but no less intense. Rebecca called to her employee to watch the front and gestured for me to follow her to a small office behind the kitchen. She set the little boy down on a playmat where he became absorbed in colorful blocks. "His name is Christopher," she said without preamble. "He's 17 months old, and yes, he's yours." The confirmation hit me like a physical blow. I had a son I'd never met, never held, never even known existed. "Why?" The word came out as barely more than a breath. "Why didn't you tell me?" "Because I knew exactly what would happen if I did. You would have swooped in with your lawyers and your money and your need to control everything, and you would have taken him away from me." "That's not true. I would never..." "Wouldn't you?" When have you ever encountered a situation you couldn't buy, control, or manage? The words stung because they carried an uncomfortable edge of truth. He's my son. I had a right to know. Rights? You gave up your rights when you chose your company over our marriage. I looked at Christopher, stacking blocks with intense focus. I've changed. Rebecca shook her head. Have you? Because from where I'm standing, you look exactly the same. I'm not trying to take him away from you. I just want to know my son. Rebecca studied my face, as if trying to determine whether I was telling the truth. Christopher chose that moment to look up and babble something that sounded like "Mama," reaching his arms up toward Rebecca. She lifted him automatically, and the gesture was so natural that it hit me like a punch to the gut. I'd missed everything. His first steps, his first words, his first birthday. How did you manage alone? Something flickered across Rebecca's face. Pain or exhaustion. The same way I managed everything else in our marriage. I figured it out. Rebecca, I know you think you can just step back into our lives and fix everything with money and determination. But Christopher and I have built a life here. A good life. Before you decide to turn that upside down, you might want to ask yourself what you're really trying to accomplish. I spent the rest of the morning walking around Millbrook Falls, trying to understand how Rebecca had ended up here. It was exactly the kind of place she'd always talked about loving. Small, community-oriented, surrounded by natural beauty. Around 2 p.m., Rebecca emerged from the cafe carrying Christopher. I watched from across the street as they walked to a small playground, Rebecca pointing out things that made Christopher laugh. They moved slowly, at a toddler's pace, stopping frequently for Christopher to examine interesting rocks or leaves. At the playground, Christopher immediately headed for a low slide designed for small children. My son was fearless, approaching the equipment with confidence, interacting easily with other children, chattering constantly to Rebecca. At one point, he fell off the slide. Nothing dramatic, just a small tumble. Rebecca was there immediately, checking for injuries, kissing his forehead until his shock turned into giggles. This was what I'd missed, not just the big milestones, but the daily reality of being a parent. You can come closer, you know. I turned to find Rebecca standing behind me. I wasn't trying to spy. Weren't you? Her tone was neutral, but I could see wariness in her eyes. We sat on a bench near the playground. He's amazing, I said softly. He is. He's curious about everything, fearless, incredibly social. He looks like me. Everyone says so, but he has my stubborn streak and my love of books. Christopher had abandoned the slide and was heading for the swings. Rebecca positioned herself to push him, and his delight was infectious. "Da-da," he said suddenly, looking directly at me and pointing. My heart stopped. Rebecca's hand stilled on the swing. "Christopher, no, that's not—" But Christopher was convinced. He kept pointing at me and repeating "da-da" with increasing enthusiasm. "He doesn't understand," Rebecca said quickly. "He calls a lot of men Dada." But Christopher kept looking at me with intensity, and despite Rebecca's protests, I could see uncertainty in her eyes. That evening, I found myself outside Rebecca's apartment building. She appeared on the front porch, having just put Christopher down for the night. "How long have you been standing out here?" she asked. "I wanted to talk to you, away from your work, away from the playground, just us." We went to a late-night coffee shop and found a quiet table. "Tell me about your life here," I said. Rebecca wrapped her hands around her coffee mug. "After the divorce, I knew I needed to start completely over. I drove north with no real destination and fell in love with this town. About a month later, I found out I was pregnant. Why didn't you tell me?" "Because I knew exactly what would happen. You would have tried to manage my pregnancy like a business project. But more than that, I was finally free. I wasn't going to give that up. You've done an amazing job with him. He's incredible. He's curious and brave and funny. He loves music and animals and anything that involves water. What happens now? I don't know. Christopher and I have a life here. I'm not going to uproot all of that just because you've suddenly decided you want to be a father. I'm not asking you to uproot anything. I'm asking you to let me be part of it. Being a father isn't just about biology, Daniel. It's about showing up every day, putting someone else's needs before your own, being present. What if I prove it to you? What if I stay here for a while, show you that I can be the kind of father Christopher deserves? Rebecca looked skeptical. You're going to stay in Millbrook Falls? What about your company? I can work remotely, at least for a while. And if I say no, then I'll leave. I won't fight you in court. But I'm asking you to give me a chance first. 1 week. Rebecca stared at me for a long moment. 1 week. But there are conditions. She laid out her terms. I couldn't be alone with Christopher until she was comfortable. I had to respect their routines. This was about Christopher, not us. And if she felt it wasn't working, it ended immediately. Fair enough, I said. The next morning, I met Rebecca and Christopher at the library for story time. Christopher immediately lit up when he saw me, calling out, "Dada," with excitement. I read him a book about farm animals, with Christopher providing sound effects for each animal. After story time, we went to a park where I watched Christopher integrate seamlessly with other children, confident, social, completely at ease. Tell me about your real life here, I said to Rebecca. She described their routine: early shifts at the cafe, daycare 3 mornings a week, quiet evenings of dinner, baths, and stories. It's not glamorous, but it's peaceful, though it's also challenging in ways I never expected. When Christopher was teething and crying all night, there was no one to take the 3 a.m. shift. I tried to imagine Rebecca handling emergencies alone, the sleepless nights, the worry, the relentless responsibility. Do you ever regret doing this alone? Sometimes I'm lonely. But I've never regretted protecting Christopher from the kind of childhood I knew you'd give him. What kind is that? The kind where love is conditional on achievement, where family dinners are interrupted by business calls. Every word was accurate, a description of my own childhood and the one I'd probably have given Christopher. My phone rang 6 times during lunch, urgent calls I sent to voicemail. Each time I could see Rebecca noting my distraction. That evening, I finally returned the calls. The Yamamoto deal was falling apart, the board was demanding an emergency meeting, and our legal team needed immediate direction. "Sir, you need to come back," Maria said. "This can't wait." I sat in my hotel room, feeling the weight of 2 competing worlds. In one, I was a CEO whose presence could save a multi-million-dollar deal. In the other, I was a father trying to prove he could put his child's needs above his own ambitions. "Handle it without me," I told Maria. "I'm not coming back. Not yet." I hung up and turned off my phone, feeling simultaneously liberated and terrified. The rest of the week fell into a rhythm that felt both natural and foreign. I spent mornings with Rebecca and Christopher, playground visits, grocery trips, quiet hours while Christopher napped. He was warming up to me quickly, but I was struggling more than expected. The constant vigilance was exhausting. The way every plan had to adjust around Christopher's needs was frustrating. By Thursday, the Yamamoto deal had collapsed. The board was threatening a vote of no confidence, and major clients were reconsidering their contracts. "Daniel, you have to come back," Alex said during a call I'd foolishly answered. "The whole company is starting to unravel." After I hung up, Rebecca was watching from the doorway. "How bad is it?" "Bad. Maybe catastrophically bad. You can go back. I won't hold it against you." "Yes, you will. And you'll be right to." That evening, we sat on her porch sharing wine. "Tell me about the business you're losing," she said. I explained the situation, and Rebecca listened thoughtfully. "It sounds like you've built a company that can't function without you. Is that bad? It's unsustainable. If you want to be a real father, you have to build a life that has room for both." "I don't know how to do that." "Then maybe that's what you need to figure out." "I've never had a life outside of work. I don't know who I am when I'm not working." Christopher doesn't care about any of that. He just wants a father who shows up. Friday morning brought a crisis that would test everything I'd learned. Christopher woke up with a fever, cranky and clingy. Rebecca called in sick and settled him on the couch. "It's probably just a virus," she said, but I could see worry in her eyes. I sat holding Christopher against my chest, his small body radiating heat. My phone buzzed constantly, but for the first time, I barely noticed. Every atom of my attention was focused on Christopher. Around noon, his fever spiked to 103 degrees. "That's too high," Rebecca said. "We need the emergency room." I drove while Rebecca held Christopher in the back seat. The hospital took him immediately, and we spent the afternoon in a sterile room while doctors worked to bring his fever down. "Has this happened before?" I asked. "A few times. The first time I was terrified. I had to figure it all out while Christopher was crying, and I was barely holding it together." "You shouldn't have had to do that by yourself." "Where were you going to be, Daniel? If I'd called during one of those emergencies, would you have dropped everything? Or would you have been handling some crisis that seemed more urgent?" My phone rang. Alex again. Without thinking, I reached for it. Rebecca watched me, her expression carefully neutral. Christopher stirred in my arms. I let the call go to voicemail. "The business will survive without me for one more day," I said quietly. For the first time since walking into the morning bean, I saw something that looked like hope in Rebecca's eyes. Late that evening, after Christopher's fever had broken, I finally listened to my voicemails. The news was as bad as expected. Deals dead, clients gone, board members calling for my resignation. But sitting in Rebecca's apartment, watching Christopher sleep peacefully, the business catastrophe felt distant and manageable. "How bad?" Rebecca asked. "Bad, but not insurmountable. I built the company once. I can rebuild it if I have to." "And if you can't? If focusing on Christopher means your business never recovers?" I thought seriously about a life where I was less successful, less wealthy, less powerful. "Then I'll figure something else out. Christopher is more important than any deal." Rebecca studied my face. "I've been thinking about something you said, about building a life that has room for both Christopher and your work. And what if you didn't have to choose? What if there was a way to restructure your business so you could be the kind of father Christopher needs?" "Are you saying you'd consider letting me stay, permanently?" "I'm saying maybe it's time to think about what's best for Christopher. If I stayed, what would that look like? For us? I don't know. We're different people now. Maybe we could be friends, co-parents, people who put Christopher's needs first. And maybe more than that. Maybe, if we could both learn to be the people Christopher needs us to be." I reached for her hand, and she let me take it. "I want to try. All of it. It won't be easy. You'll have to change everything about how you approach success." "I know. So why are you willing to risk it?" I thought about Christopher's face when he'd called me Dada, about the kind of man I wanted to be when he was old enough to remember our time together. Because I've found something more important than being successful. I've found something I don't want to lose." Rebecca smiled, the first genuine smile she'd given me since I'd walked into her cafe. "Okay," she said softly. "Let's see what we can build together." If you enjoyed this incredible story of second chances and hidden truths, make sure you hit that like button and tell me in the comments. What would you have done in Daniel's situation? 6 months later, I'm writing this from the office above the Morning Bean, where Rebecca and I have turned the second floor into a co-working space. My company survived, though it looks different now. I sold my majority stake, keeping enough involvement to stay engaged while freeing myself from the demands that once consumed my life. I'm less wealthy than I was a year ago, but infinitely richer in the ways that matter. Christopher calls me Daddy now, and every time he says it, I'm reminded of the choice I made, to put his needs above my ambitions, to choose presence over profit. Rebecca and I are taking things slowly, rebuilding trust and rediscovering love. Last week, Christopher took his first steps between us in our backyard, and I realized this was what success really looked like. Sometimes the best thing that can happen is having your world turned upside down by walking into the wrong cafe at exactly the right time. Trust me, you won't want to miss what I'm sharing next week. Hit subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one.